Thank you everyone for joining. Good evening, everyone. I, Nilanjana, on behalf of Cuts International and Nishith Desai Associates, welcome everyone to our virtual roundtable on Power Up to the Gamers, Empowering Consumers in the Online Gaming World. Before we dive into this exciting discussion, I'm just setting out some house announcements. Today's session will be 1 hour, 30 minutes long. The session will begin with Mr. Pradeep Mehta's welcome address and the views of Mr. Maheshwari from MeitY. The panel discussion will be for 1 hour, after which we will have a question and answer session to make the session more interactive. We encourage the members of the panel to keep their cameras on during the session. Also, please keep your microphones on mute unless you're speaking. This session is being recorded and will be released later on Cuts International's YouTube channel. The link for the same will be given in the chat box. It is also encouraged that the audience members post their questions to the moderator, indicating relevant speakers in the chat box to make this session more interactive. I now invite Mr. Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General Cuts International, for his welcome address and to start the session.
Thank you very much, Nilanjana. And let me join Nilanjana in welcoming all of you to this event. As she pointed out, it is something which is happening for the first time. In a sense, the kind of regulation or lack of regulation in the online gaming world. And therefore, I feel that there would be a lot of dipping to do in order to understand as to where we stand and where do we wish to go. I mean, the online gaming industry in India is a sunrise industry, as we know, and it is growing at a fast pace. The total number of online gamers grew 8% from 360 million in 2020 to 390 million in 2021. It is expected that the number of gamers will cross 450 million by 2023, which is nearly about 20% of our population, not a little more. What is expected is that the whole market will become about of a value of about $7 billion by the year 2026, financial year 2026, and most importantly, generate at least 200,000 new jobs in the process. Despite the industry's growth, it remains largely unregulated, thus making the discussion towards gamer protection and by extension, empowering consumers even more important. As you know, this is something which you've seen happening in many new things which happen. For example, one thing which I was associated with cable TV. It was a total gray area when it began. And it took a long time before things could be regularized. And finally, I was handed over the regulation to do that. And yet, one of the problems in that was, and this is something which reflects on this particular aspect as well, is that even at that point of time, regulation of cable TV was to be done better, as advised by the then chairman of TRI, Pradeep, at a local level, because you can't expect a central regulator to be able to do that. In any event, this gaming is betting and gambling is something which is under the state's jurisdiction. So clearly there is a local element to it, and rather than a federal. The few state governments which have come up on their regulations have tried to address the issues of gaming addiction, financial losses, and suicides amongst players. I mean, the kind of downside effects which happens with many of these things. This could happen even if it was not online. Even offline, you find the same kind of downside effects or mal effects which happen. For instance, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu prohibited online gaming in all forms, stating that such games are games of chance. However, the high courts of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu have struck down such amendments to legislation banning online scale gaming as unconstitutional. Recently, Rajasthan has issued a draft law and held a stakeholder consultation as well on the same. The central government has set up an interministerial panel to work on regulations for the online gaming industry and identify a nodal ministry to look after the sector. Thus, the time is now to address the issues of player protection through a regulatory framework. Now, when you talk in terms of a nodal ministry in the central government, and as I said, being a state subject, there is a constitutional amendment, which is, of course, not on the cards. It will still have to be dealt with by a central ministry. And what I see, Minister Maheshwari here will be able to throw more light, representing MeitY. Now, at Cuts, we've always tried to push the envelope towards optimal regulation. Let me underline the word optimal, so that promotion is, I beg your pardon, so that innovation is not sacrificed. At the same time, protection of consumers is also the best possible. And online gaming is no different than any of the other sectors, as I said. Anything new which comes up always has these problems about over-regulation or under-regulation, and where do you strike the balance? Any regulatory framework, in our opinion, should consider costs and benefits on different stakeholders, particularly gamers and startups. It should also be enforceable. That is, again, a very important thing. There's no point having a statute which is not enforceable. To this end, we believe there is a need to undertake an ex-ante regulatory impact assessment while thinking about a regulatory framework for the sector. A regulatory impact assessment of the draft regulations, whenever they come up. It is also important to understand players' perspective, expectations, concerns, level of grievance redress in this regard. To this end, Cuts plans to undertake evidence-led study to understand and highlight consumers' perception, attitude, and behavior in the sector. This is one among many such studies that we've been doing, primary surveys. Given the sunrise status of the industry, over-regulation may be avoided, and co-regulation with adequate consumer representation and stricter mandates for player protection might be the way forward. Let me repeat, this is very important. This is sort of the core of the argument that we would like to take forward, is that over-regulation can be avoided through co-regulation with adequate consumer representation and stricter mandates for player protection. Thus, to engage on the issue of player protection and to discuss how to provide a regulatory power-up to the players, Cuts and Nishith Desai Associates have organized this virtual roundtable to engage eminent experts from the online gaming industry and other stakeholders to discuss consumer empowerment in the online gaming world. I would like to welcome all our speakers and participants, particularly Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari from MeitY, and look forward to an engaging discussion. Over to my colleague Nilanjana for taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta, for your thoughts. I now invite Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, Scientist, G and Group Coordinator, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, to grace us with his thoughts on the subject matter. We are very glad to have you with us, sir.
So thank you, Nilanjana ji. Thank you, Pradeep ji, and thanks a lot to the organizers, Cuts and Nishith Desai. It's my privilege to be here with you to share our views, particularly, in fact, my views, because today I will not be representing government for that reason, and that gives me the flexibility to be able to speak a bit more freely than normally what we should be able to. I would like to continue with what Pradeep Mehta ji has mentioned about the present status of regulations in the country, the way the industry is growing, the potential that it has. So everybody agrees that maybe from a user perspective, from an industry perspective, if the industry is well managed, the industry has a potential to grow, industry has a potential to generate jobs, industry has a potential to, in fact, be in line with Atmanirbhar Bharat program, and maybe even look for export opportunities. As far as gaming is concerned, it is something which children love to have. It is always popular and will continue to be popular, particularly with the younger children. Games can help to supplement children's learning and teaching and teach them key life skills. Gamifications can be used to teach children the school subjects and complicated subjects of finance, politics, and anything else. In fact, this country has a good cultural heritage, good, I should say, real or mythological characters. And the kind of variety that we have, in fact, gaming can be one such tool to take that knowledge to the masses, to the students, to the parents, to teachers, to whoever we are, I mean, in whichever role that we are playing in the society. But definitely, for anything, for any industry to grow, the rules of the game have to be very clear. And to that extent, there is an expectation in this scenario also, where the industry particularly is looking for regulatory environment. Today, if you look at from an IT perspective, there are certain things which are already available. So I'm just trying to immediately shift to the regulatory kind of things, what government can do and what government is doing. So first of all, we have under the IT Act, the concept of body corporate and certain expectations from a body corporate, and the rules are primarily the sensitive data and personal sensitive data, SPDI, sensitive personal data and information rules, which is primarily for security of the data, personal data of the gamers, of the users, which has been collected by the platform. The platforms need to develop, need to have, and to communicate their terms of reference, their privacy policy, and certain details of the users need to be handled by them, has to be processed by them in a secure manner, and any breach of any data which happens, immediately they also need to respond to the computer emergency response team. Any valid game can also be, I mean, the way the users join, if there is no, I should say, bias in the platform, ideally any valid platform is also an intermediary. And therefore, the IT Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code 2021, Rules 2021, Part 2 of them particularly. So functionality, I mean, whatever functionality the game is providing is where you are like a publisher. But if you are a valid game, now I'll come to this point as to how do you determine whether you are a valid game or not, and what exactly, I mean, where this is where it's actually we are looking for the regulation. But assuming that you are a valid game, the part 2 of these intermediary rules and digital media ethics code rules 2021 also apply. And to that an extent, once again, there are certain due diligence which the platform need to follow. And one of these due diligence is once again conveying the terms and conditions, retaining certain data, and to have a robust grievance redressal mechanism. Because the focus of this, I should say, interaction today is on the user safety. I'm taking the user safety related issues. So a robust grievance redressal mechanism is expected from the platform which is providing such facilities. Now, given the, so maybe there is further not much right now into the due diligence guidelines as have been stated in the IT rules. But if I logically look at that as to what should be the expectation from a particular platform, any platform for that reason should provide a neutral kind of a equal opportunity it should be a player-to-player interaction and not a player-to-system interaction. There should not be any bot involved. There should be, I mean, if there is a random number generation facility, then this random generation should actually be a random number generation. So as to ensure that there is no, I should say, bias towards or against the player. The payments, particularly if it's a real money game or pay to play game, then we should also expect, one, a strong KYC, two, wherever game and whichever state the game is not being allowed, I mean, maybe some sort of a geo-fencing to be done by the platform. The amount which can be invested, I mean, which can be put up in the game should also be limited in some way. But in addition to this, because gaming, I mean, the platforms, the way the platforms are constructed, any gaming is developed, it's always, I'll say, is glamorous, is always addictive, and therefore games tend to be addictive in nature. Now, this is yet another thing. I mean, it can be good from an industry perspective, but can be bad from a user perspective, or from a family perspective, or from a parent's perspective. And to that extent, there should be some limit on the gaming time. Now, this is something, I mean, which will have to be, I mean, which can be varying depending upon the age. So age rating is also one such issue which has to be there. So depending upon the type of game, age rating also has to be there. And lastly, I will say about the advertisements, that there has to be a responsible advertisements, not be misleading, not be unlawful. Now I come to the need for regulation, as has been mentioned, I mean, as Pradeep ji mentioned, that today it's a state subject. I mean, the way that at the time the constitution was written, in fact, online was not the word. Probably the focus was on gambling and betting. And because gambling and betting has a potential to create law and order scenario, therefore, in the constitution, gambling and betting has been defined and has been allocated, the subject has been allocated to the state. All the majority of the state acts, laws have come out from a old public gambling act. Though the Supreme Court has conveyed, I mean, particularly the game of skills to be a valid, I should say, business protected under 19(1)(g). But the fact remains that many states, while some of the states do permit gambling with licensing, there are states which do not even allow online gaming. And when I say online gaming and gambling, the difference is also very clear, conveyed by the Honorable Supreme Court, where there is a preponderance of a skill or where it's a pure chance. Is how do you determine the game of skill or chance? The problem is the internet does not know any boundary. And when we are working in a borderless world, confining any application, any app to be at the state level is not really possible. So even for gambling, even for online gambling, even if you say that maybe I'll not permit it beyond my state of Meghalaya or Sikkim or Nagaland, the fact remains, unless the platform has done the geo-fencing, it doesn't really work. So the game will continue to remain available, game or gambling, whichever way we want to say. Right now, I am saying like this, maybe because the definition of, or maybe because the criteria of what constitutes a game or what constitutes a gambling, though the principle has been defined, unfortunately at the ground level, the criteria are still not very well settled, and which is what is resulting into states coming out with their own definitions, and state to state definitions are varying, even courts to courts, high courts to high courts, the interpretation is varying. Once again, coming back, that as we go online, The problem which is that the internet not knowing any boundary, it is very difficult to contain the game within the, or to contain the gambling within that particular state only. And the problem further gets aggravated when there are offshore sites coming into India. Many of them happen to be gambling sites. The problem further gets aggravated when particularly Google Play Store, which is considered to be the largest Play Store and maybe in a way providing some sort of a protection in terms of certain play protect features available in the app. These apps, at the end of the day, most of these games are available through apps, and these apps are not available on the Google Play Store, and hence are mostly downloaded from the third-party app stores or are directly downloaded from the game, from the website. The Android does provide certain security, but if you have to install any such app which is not available on Google Play Store for that reason, and I'm talking in the Android environment as of now, then you have to overrule the Android warning. True that the game gets installed, but the fact remains that possibility of updating such games, and in the name of game, any malware getting into the phone is not is not uncommon, or it's quite possible. And to that extent, downloading any such game which is not from a proper store can actually be leading to a vulnerability. Not only vulnerability from a government perspective, from a state perspective, actually it is outside the state jurisdiction because it is coming from anywhere. And if it is from outside India, it is completely outside the purview of state, because blocking in India can happen only, if at all, blocking has to be done, particularly if the takedown has to happen, it can happen will be at the country level, because IPs in the country are not really divided as per the state. They have been given based on the country level. So having said so, there is a need that the subject of particularly the online gaming is dealt at the center. Unfortunately, there is no central ministry which has been allocated the subject, and therefore the very first thing which we are looking for as government. So now I'm putting once again trying to put the government hat. The very first thing which the government has to decide is to which is the nodal ministry, and it is this, and the fact that you are a sunrise industry, there is a potential and everything, that the issue is the government is now well cognizant of the issue, is being dealt at the highest level, and that is where government has very recently constituted an interministerial task force of some ministries, or in fact members are secretaries of a few key ministries which can play an important role, whether it is Ministry of Finance or Home or MeitY or Youth and Sports or DPIIT, or in fact NITI Aayog, which had earlier come up with a I should say a policy document on fantasy sports games. So that's the first thing which has been done, and one of the tasks this IMTF has got to immediately come and conclude as to which is the nodal ministry, because that is where the ball gets rolling. The next thing will be as to how do you come up, what kind of legislation will be required. Can you come up with some rules within the IT rules? Within the IT Act, the way the IT intermediary guidelines and digital media ethics code, particularly the part 3, has been rolled out. Yes, it is possible, but there can be legal challenges, because whenever there is a money involved, it is equally important that there is some sort of a licensing or at least registration which should happen. And those which are not registered can be considered as blacklisted or maybe not legally allowed. So the next challenge within the IT rules will be that those which are considered to be unlawful, how should they be blocked? Now, within MeitY, we have one section called as Section 69A, which fortunately or unfortunately over last 2-3 years has become quite popular in the industry. I mean, which is not our intent to make it popular. I mean, we want to use it scarcely, but yes, given the popularity of the social media platforms, the intermediary platforms, the digital Nagrik, availability of digital Nagrik, the flexibility the Constitution provides to us, there is a lot of, I should say, infringing material going beyond the fundamental rights which have been given to us as a right. And therefore, the amount of, I should say, URLs or information which is being blocked on internet through the provisions of Section 69A is going up. Unfortunately, Section 69A deals with national security and public order and security related issues. Unlawful gaming platforms or gambling platforms, for that reason, do not fit in within the definition of, I should say, or within the context of 69A. And to that an extent, the only route which is available today for blocking of, or for going in for blocking of the so-called unlawful site is through a court order, which is also not actually, the mechanism doesn't work too fast. So in a way, we are left in a scenario where the unlawful gambling websites, particularly from offshore, continue to thrive, and we are not really able to do anything. And even if we attempt to I should say, come up with some sort of a semblance through the IT rules, we will be able to put up certain due diligence from the valid platform, but then, or maybe a good grievance redressal from the valid platform, and all those talks of neutrality and player protection and fair play and advertisement responsibility and all those things, they will actually be put on. So that will become part of the due diligence to be followed by the valid platform, while the invalid and illegal platforms continue to thrive. So that's, unfortunately, to me, it does not appear to be the right solution, though it can be the first step towards the solution. So the final solution, in my opinion, is a central law which has been advocated by for example, our colleague Gowree Gokhale ji and many other lawyers and many other stakeholders. In fact, very recently, the ministry also conducted a stakeholder consultation at the level of MOS. Our Honorable Minister of State, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, I come to that as well. So I do feel that we do require a central law. A central law, maybe a light touch law, which is what Pradeep ji was mentioning about the balancing of the legal, because normally law means trying to restrict. Now here, the law means the law should be able to promote the right way of gaming, right games, while not allowing the games which are considered to be either illegal or maybe are injurious to a certain age group. So all those things can be done through a law, and law can be fairly simple. In this particular case, it's not like IT Act, which is so complex. So this is where we are. We hope that maybe the nodal ministry is decided very soon. And there is also a category of eSports, which I do believe is being dealt and will continue to be dealt by Ministry of Youth and Sports. So this is what I will like to mention. I mean, I'm free to take up any one or two questions, particularly, I mean, that can actually set the ball rolling, as well as maybe any expectation which any of you may have from the government can also be conveyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maheshwari, for your poignant thoughts. We look forward to working with the government while it moves forward to identify the nodal ministry and setting up a legal framework covering the expanse of issues that you have covered. I sincerely hope that some of the issues that were highlighted by you will be deliberated upon in the panel today. Thank you again, sir, for your thoughts.
Yeah, so thank you.
If anybody has any questions for Mr. Maheshwari, I would request them to place the same in the chat box so that it can be directed to him.
So good. For the time being, I take leave and thank you very much. 2 cuts again. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. We are glad to have you. I now invite Ms. Tanisha Khanna, Associate Nishith Desai Associates, to give a 2 to 3 minutes brief overview of the issues surrounding the online gaming industry.
Hi everyone. Very happy to be here today. I think, the most important question that we need to ask ourselves is why are we here today and why is it important for us to be talking about this issue? As Mr. Maheshwari pointed out, the way that, our gaming laws are today is they operate under a prohibitory regime where gambling activities, games of chance are prohibited, and there's an exclusion for what we call as games of skill. Now, under this, exclusion-based regime, which is a prohibitory regime, there's really a lack of specialized regulations for the online gaming industry. Of course, we do have, the general laws. We have our Consumer Protection Act, which introduces like a basic level of consumer protection provisions across all industries. But, as Mr. Maheshwari was pointing out, that this industry has certain nuanced issues which need to be dealt with under specialized regulations. The other issue is, as also Mr. Maheshwari was pointing out, is it's not just real money games of skill which are prevalent in the market today. We also have another category of games which are free to play games. We have casual games, which could be potentially addictive in nature, which could have violent content, which could not be appropriate for a certain age group. The question is, are our current laws, well enough equipped to deal with these sorts of games? And then we have a third category of games such as eSports. This industry really needs a very nuanced look, a holistic look at all these types of games and what are the regulations required. The other issue, as Mr. Maheshwari also pointed out, is we have several offshore gambling websites which are being made available in India today, and we have Indian users remitting money to participate in these websites which are offshore. Currently, under the present framework, our state laws don't have extraterritorial applicability to apply to these gambling websites, and the players' rights are not being able to be enforced against these offshore gambling websites. As I was mentioning, there is a lack of specialized regulations for this industry. But presently, we do have some self-regulatory bodies which have come up with a certain set of self-regulatory standards which are being adopted by some of the operators. But again, there's nothing mandatory which obligates operators from becoming members of these organizations and adhering to these standards. As we know that, as Mr. Maheshwari was pointing out, that this is one of the fastest growing sunrise industries in India. So we have hundreds of new game products which are being launched every day. And there's no, overall guidance and regulatory oversight on these gaming platforms. And there's a lack of proper controls. So, we do really need to look at these issues, and I'm looking forward to hearing the panelists' deliberations on these issues. I think from our experience, some of the issues that we've seen today, and I'll just, list them out here, one is very importantly, protection of player funds. We've seen platform security issues, platform integrity issues, as Mr. Maheshwari was mentioning, that, we have bots and we have tampering and issues like that, which are happening. We have to really look at protection of minors. We have to look at protection of vulnerable people who may be prone to gambling, prone to gaming addictions. And, most importantly, currently, we also need protection from these offshore gambling websites. And, I think because of all of these issues, it's ultimately the player who suffers. And even even from a business perspective, for responsible gaming operators, I think we'll all agree that to even build long-term sustainable businesses in India, consumer confidence and consumer trust really has to be the cornerstone of this industry's development. We at NDA also agree that the best way to address these issues is through a central law with a core regulatory framework, as Mr. Maheshwari was pointing out, a light touch regulatory framework. And participation of these self-regulatory bodies is extremely critical because they do have a nuanced understanding of these issues and how best to address them. So with that, I'll hand it over back to Nilanjana, and I'm looking forward to hearing the panel discussions on these issues and how we can address them.
Thank you, Tanisha. With this, I now hand over the reins of this session to our moderator, Mr. Prince Gupta, Senior Research Associate, CUTS International, who would introduce our panel and take this roundtable forward. Please.
Thanks, Nilanjana. A very warm welcome to everyone. And we had a stellar session from Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari. He sort of laid out the broad charter of what is happening in the online gaming industry and how the government is looking at it. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists. So we have Ms. Gowree Gokhale from Nishith Desai Associates. She's a partner and heads the TMT practice. We have Mr. Barde, who is the CEO of the e-Gaming Federation. It is one of the largest self-regulatory bodies. And we also have Ms. Shivani, who is Director for eSports Players Welfare Association, which represents more than 13,000 gamers. So I'd like to start the discussion with you, Gowree, that as Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari pointed out, that there are several challenges in terms of regulating the online gaming space. But and he rightly sort of stated that consumer protection is the central issue. So could you sort of deep dive and like give a broad picture of what do you think are the specific challenges which consumers face, and just lay the broad picture?
Sure. So when when you ask in terms of challenges that consumers face, obviously I'm not aware of any market study being conducted or otherwise which has demonstrated what are those challenges. It is my understanding of the having worked with the industry for so long, and especially in the context of India, right, where you have you're not living in one India. There are 4 Indias, as we always say, right, because there are so many different strata or sort of of understanding, literacy levels and all of that, right? So anything that you talk in India in the context of keeping the consumer at the center, I feel that itself is one challenge. That when you look at India, whatever laws you're looking at or otherwise, you always need to keep that in mind, that whatever you create, right, has to address the all the audience, basically, right? You will have small town in small towns, people want to play these games, right? And interestingly, I'm slightly digressing, but in one of the conversations, a discussion came up that actually women are feeling benefited by the gaming activity, because they feel that when they are suppressed at home and all that, and this is something which is kind of liberating from them to win something on the platform, right? So these are very nuanced things in the Indian context, one has to keep in mind, right? So that itself, in my view, is something for the industry to consider whenever you are creating a product, whenever you're explaining. Just to give an example, the transparency that we talk about, right? What are the games, what are the rules of the games, right? So you write so many detailed terms and conditions, may not be may not work. So can you create short videos in local languages, which I see on YouTube, right? Some of the players actually do that. Some players themselves, create videos to say कि ये platform पे ऐसे जाके खेलो, ऐसे कर सकते हो आप, etc. Right? So basically, when you're talking, even from a transparency perspective, can there be different ways of creating that transparencies, right? Right. So that is the example I wanted to give in the Indian context, right? So that is the second. The third one is, I feel, is this entire thing, that exposure in the Indian context. Now we have to live with the fact that games of chance currently are not permissible. in the future, if the government in certain states they want to do it, or central government wants to do it, let's keep that aside. But what is game of skill and what is game of chance, right? And whether some platforms are, pushing the envelope too much to, sway towards the game of chance, but trying to push it under a, umbrella of game of skill, right? So that itself, therefore you're exposing the players to an activity which is not legal, right? So that itself is a question mark, right? And of course, all the other things, that were discussed, such as protection of player funds, grievance redressal. So all these items are definitely required, but the challenge today is there is no one person saying that this is what is required for the industry. And I'm not saying that you definitely need to have a very strict law, which lays down everything. It can be a co-regulatory mechanism, but to say that even in a co-regulatory mechanism, to say that you have to be part of, say, self-regulation, nobody is saying that, right? So I think in the Indian context, the difficulty with all, I'm not repeating that it's state law, you need to have a central law. I mean, we have said that and like enough number of times that there is a need of central law, right? But I'm talking more from a player protection perspective. There are these nuanced things or challenges that we have to keep in mind to say that is there somebody saying that you have to do this? The answer is no. Correct? Is somebody saying that this is the way you should determine game of skill versus chance? The answer is no. Is somebody mandating that, this is the way you should do transparency? The answer is no. Right? So everything is no today when it comes to player protection as a legal requirement. Self-regulation, people are voluntarily doing it very well, even internationally when we speak. Yeah, we'll come to that in a bit. Yeah. So these are the challenges I thought I'll just start with.
Yeah, thanks. I'll like to ask Shivani the same question that though Gowree has highlighted that what are the actual issues, but Shivani, coming from a consumer welfare organization, what do you like? I would like you to highlight those challenges from a consumer viewpoint.
Hi, Prince. Thank you, Gowree. Nice to be here amongst everyone. So from a consumer and a player's perspective, to be very honest, as far as our data stays and our collection size isn't that huge, considering the player number is 50 million and plus. But in around 15% of the cases, it's the same player or person who's also playing FIFA, who's also playing fantasy sports, who's also spending time on casual gaming platforms. During COVID, we've seen it's the same person who's a chess grandmaster also in a physical world, but playing online games also, or online chess also. So the biggest, I think, challenge that has been with especially professional gamers and professional players is the criminalization aspect of it. So you see any state that bans online gaming ultimately also criminalizes the person who's playing the game. And it can be up to like 2 months of imprisonment to 6. Whereas there are other laws which restrict any kind of actual arrest, but that doesn't free them from the fact that they might be a shoutcaster on YouTube, they might be an Asian Games medalist, but if they are paying money to play in any of these states, they're ultimately a criminal. So that legitimization is actually and it is a deterrent measure that is used by the government or the state, right, to ensure that while gaming companies are geo-blocking, that the deterrent measure is the player won't play if they're criminalized. The second is obviously the data privacy aspect of it, which Mr. Maheshwari said. We don't have enough data, but PUBG gave data that when PUBG was banned in India, they lost 50% users, which says a lot. That a company that operates globally has 50% users and players based out of India because of how mobile gaming and internet has swept into our lifestyles in the last 3 or 4 years. But there is nothing that protects player data. The obvious activity that was done was to ban the game altogether, whereas that particular game is also an Asian Games and Olympics event, and we have medalists who play PUBG. Now coming back to the other consumer protection problems which already Gowree and Tanisha and everyone has pointed out. We also see that when gamers are playing on offshore platforms, they genuinely and mostly have no legal recourse. So, barring what was already added about transparency, data privacy, I mean, there's also a point of understanding that we have to come to, that none of our laws are future proof. We are currently in the cusp of sort of at least discussing or trying to regulate a sector where there will be new games on a weekly, monthly basis, and there will be pay to play formats, and uh, there will be a huge spectrum of players who will be on all platforms. So to be able to assess them on the same bucket, of course, predominance of skill is a very, very big test, but the other test is also ease of cheating. So, for example, I mean, we've spoken to pro players who play poker also and who play chess also, and they upfront say that they will never put that much money on chess, even though they're grandmasters, because it's easier to cheat. So, of course, there is one mechanism to check whether how skilled a person is, but the other is to see how difficult it is to cheat. And that, of course, happens only when there is some mandatory uniform guidelines that all companies have to follow. There's only so much protection that we can give to a consumer as a civil society conversation and activist, but ultimately there's only so much that we can also do, right? Which of course comes with some kind of uniform regulations.
Right. Thanks, Shivani. I think that was very insightful, and a few points which were not pointed out before were brought forth. I would like to go to Samir and ask that, given these challenges which both Gowree and Shivani have highlighted, and of course were also talked about Rakesh, Mr. Maheshwari, can you please elaborate upon what SROs are basically trying to do so that these problems are addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Prince. And sorry, I'm going to be off video. Actually, my net is acting quite strange, so I'm going to conserve bandwidth as much as possible. I think for me, there are 2 or 3 major issues, right? To answer your question directly, what we have done at the EGF is look at global best practices in terms of regulations abroad. We've then incorporated it into a system where we have something known as the code of conduct, which is our own standard. We do something which is fairly unique even as a SRO. We've followed international best practices in terms of certification. So audits are done by an independent third party. This is not self-certification. Our members don't say I'm following something. We actually run full-scale audits where the entire database of the company is accessible to the auditing organization for all requirements of the standard. So that's one part, that it's an independent third-party audit. It's not self-certification, or we don't do the audit also. We are only making the standard. Our standard is dynamic. So currently, as we speak, in the next couple of weeks, we'll release version 3 of the standard. So standard itself keeps changing and evolving as everything around it changes. Because as Shivani just said, there's a new game every week, and we need to be able to accommodate for quotes unquote innovation, etc. Best practices also. 3, the certification is dynamic, which means that it's not a one-time certification. Audits happen every year, and only if you meet the requirements will you get certified and stay certified. So I think in that sense, we are very unique in terms of the integrity with which we do what we do. So one is the process. And I think this is a very important part of also going ahead, what the SRO, the designated SRO should be doing as good practices. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, what does the standard itself consist on? And for this, what we need to understand is, what is the standard made for, or who is the standard made for? Our standard is built for player protection. It's not meant for industry. So what we're trying to do is put in place a standard that looks at transparency, that looks at fairness, that looks at enabling responsible play, that looks at player protection. And so the requirements under the standard, and a lot of those requirements Mr. Maheshwari talked about earlier, are there to ensure that the player is protected. So whether it's about underage players, whether it's about bots not being allowed, whether it's about player money being kept in separate accounts to ensure that they're not used for operational purposes, whether it's about things like SSL level encryption to ensure data privacy and security, whether it's about RNG certification, etc., etc., etc. There's a long list of requirements that we have, including responsible gaming features, which he talked about. Like, for example, how do you ensure that players can control how much money they're spending? So features like daily monthly limits, for example, or how much time they're spending on the site. So features like self-exclusion, for example, etc. So our standards essentially look at all those aspects of gameplay and of the environment within which the player is playing. So that's broadly what we're trying to do as a SRO.
Thanks, Samir. So, when you stated that these are the standards which you're setting, which the operators, gaming operators, need to meet, and they need to go through the audits, don't you think that such standards would actually be a problem for the small firms? Because small firms, at the end of the day, they have limited capacity and limited resources. So don't you think that that will limit small players to, I mean, small firms to come up, and ultimately it will limit innovation, and also it is against the consumer interest? What's your take?
So I think it's a fine balance, Prince, and hopefully we've been treading that balance because a few of our members are not very big firms. We've got unicorns, but we've also got startups. And so what we do is that we do consultations with members to figure out how it is. So for example, and I'll give you what I mean. There's certain things which are critical for player protection. So for example, having a daily or monthly limit is critical. In fact, we go one step ahead and we say a daily limit can't be more than 1/3 of your monthly limit. So you can't even max out on your entire monthly limit at the same time. I think this is a no compromise almost, if you ask me. Or something like self exclusion is a no compromise. You will have to provide this feature. However, let's say for a moment, you want to talk about escalation mechanism for grievance redressal. Now, whether you want to do that through a full-fledged, call center, or whether you want to do that over email, or whether you want to use a chatbot to do it, etc., would be left to you. So that would depend on the scale of your operations. It would depend on your resource availability, etc., etc., etc. So what I'm trying to get at is, for each of these people, how they go about doing a particular thing. There's certain things which are mandatory because they're critical for player protection, but there's certain things which are left to the firm to do in any which way that they find suitable. So we will not mandate that you have to automate this particular process, or we will not mandate that you need to have whatever a 400-seater call center in operation. What we will say is that customer response time needs to be 24 hours. Now, how you do that is left to you, and depending on you as a firm, how you want to sort of meet that requirement.
Yeah, I think that is, I mean, that is a very balanced approach, Samir. But going to sort of the adequacy of this. So after, I mean, maybe Shivani and Gowree can answer this. That like, do you guys think that the measures which SRO are trying to take, such standards, etc., will these be adequate, and are players actually aware of these measures? Because an SRO can sort of try to take up a lot of standard setting, etc. But at the end of the day, if the consumers are not aware or the players are not aware, how will they benefit out of this? So maybe Gowree first and then Shivani.
Sure. So no, it's a very, very valid point. And I just want to probably, before I answer that, also want to call out that there are certain industries, right, where there can be absolutely no compromise on the consumer or player, in this case, player protection. Right. So therefore, even if it appears that there is a barrier to entry, so be it, because there cannot be a compromise, right? So and as Samir said, there are certain things I don't believe, there is always this conversation that, this is creating barrier, there is a cost and all that. All this can be sorted. I think there are enough and more technologies which can help you to do it at a suboptimal, at an optimal cost, right? So I think unless somebody comes up with numbers that this is the cost and this is how it is barrier, we can look at it. But according to me, that there should not be any compromise. Now, insofar as sufficiency is concerned, I believe when we, and I had helped a couple of self-regulatory bodies to even set up standards, right? So when we were looking at it, we also looked at internationally what is there, because internationally it's not even skill versus chance. They say even if it is skill, irrespective whatever, this player protection measures have to be taken. So when the self-regulatory bodies worked on this, they did look at international best practices, and we have tried to bring them to India as well, in the more in a self-regulatory mode rather than a regulation mode. So in my view, these are good standards, and internationally what we have seen also, and Samir can chip in here, internationally we see that from time to time regulators look at whether these are sufficient, and then they keep escalating that, okay, now this additionally thing, this needs to be done, etc. And from game to game also standards required may be different, right? So for different types of games they may be different. So more or less I'm okay with the standards, but the most important point that you asked me is the awareness. That is where in the Indian context I feel a lot needs to be done, right? And even I would also come in a little bit on the advertising here, because when you see the advertising and awareness, they have to go hand in hand, right? Because you're advertising in a manner sometimes, and I'm not saying that all platforms are doing that, but in a manner it gives an impression that it's so easy to just go and win, right? Ultimately it's a game of skill, so obviously unless you have a skill, you're not going to win, right? So that complete awareness and ability for for players to at least try the game, say for free, to test their own skills, right? I think that could be an additional thing that one can consider, in my view, to say that, okay, there should be an ability for me to try out a new game format, see whether I'm getting skilled out there, and then go and do play in a play for money or whatever, for money format, right? So these are the additional things, but awareness is an absolute must in my view. Even the awareness that, are you playing on a website which is kosher? Are you playing on a website which has self-certificate, sorry, they are with a self-regulatory body, or are you playing on a foreign website versus Indian website, right? These are the things where I feel a lot needs to be done by the industry, by the government. You have seen in RBI context how do not share OTP, that campaign was so effective. I know there are still frauds, but such a simple effective campaign, right? So such campaigns will be absolutely important in addition to what the industry has already done.
Okay, thanks, Gowree. Shivani, your thoughts?
I mean, I completely agree with Gowree on all the points. And, like I was saying earlier, it's also about how much, see, when an able adult is enjoying a game, like Gowree said, that firstly, it shouldn't even matter whether it's skill or chance. Okay. I mean, one of the most heavily regulated industries, if we look at right now, which impacts probably everyone, is the insurance industry. If we have to look at how, and there are different kinds of insurance agents, and at the same time, they've all seamlessly integrated together and are functioning very well when it comes to regulatory mechanism. Now, because there are games which are skill games that can be played with money also and can be played without money also. It's a choice. The advertisement at that point makes such a big difference. And at this point, I sometimes feel there's a major disconnect between, on a lighter note, between the marketing and the legal teams here, because the advertisements seem as if today I put 5 rupee and I'm going to win a jackpot of 1 crore. But the reality is that when I'm playing that game worth 5 rupees, there are also 1 lakh or 2 lakh other people who are playing that game with that amount of money. When I keep winning until the end, when I win the 30th game and the tournament, is when I'm going to be the winner. So the mechanism to attract more users by using this tactic is something that obviously has to be dealt with in a uniform manner. Even, for example, terms and conditions of games, there are a lot of platforms who upfront in their terms and conditions say that if there was an internet glitch while you playing a game, we are not responsible. There are some platforms that say we will give you a list of everyone who participated, how much money everyone put. So this uniformity in practice and doesn't exist. And this uniformity will come only when there is a directive direct mechanism, and there's a state mandate which says that, there's only so much till where we can protect players. But are we doing even 5% of that right now? I don't think so.
Okay, thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Shivani. We have some questions from audience as well. Rashi has
Prince, can I just take one moment, small addition over there?
sure, Samir.
Yeah, thanks. So absolutely agree with what both of them, both Gowree and Shivani have said. I think we frankly need to understand 2 or 3 things. One, that this is something where everyone has to be responsible. It can't be a specific stakeholder's responsibility that the government has to do something or industry has to do something. And my point here being that, sadly, a lot of times when this discussion happens, the focus is on real money gaming. The truth is that it could be a housewife playing Candy Crush 8 hours a day. Now, at the end of the day, there is no regulation that the government can bring in which will actually ensure that the housewife doesn't play Candy Crush for 8 hours a day. So unless I'm planning to be responsible, I mean, we've seen any number of cases where, people will come later and say someone spent 15,000 rupees on a game, and it's usually a child who's 12 years old. Now, I'm wondering how the child got access to 15,000 rupees because it's not cash, which means that someone gave the child a credit card or a debit card or access to a wallet or access to a payment gateway, and that is usually the parent. So I think there is, there is clearly a need, and I'm not at all trying to say that industry shouldn't be responsible, etc., etc. I'm just saying that there is a need for all stakeholders to take a equal responsibility in this. Like Gowree mentioned, I mean, we can make the best regulations in the world, but if the player decides not to be aware of it and not to make themselves aware of it and not to play, let's say, on a certified site, there is very little that anyone can do then to sort of try and it's the equivalent of saying कि अच्छा vehicles तो road पे licensed मिलते हैं, but I am going to get one manufactured by the next door, whatever garage, and then I'm going to drive it around, and if it crashes, then I'm going to blame, the whole this thing. So it doesn't honestly function
Right.
that way.
I think I'll just come to that because therein where I think the possibilities of government intervention etc. lie. But
Okay.
we have a few questions. I think Rashi from the audience wants to ask and has her hand up. Rashi, if you could unmute yourself.
Thanks, Prince. Hi, everyone. I'm glad that I'm on this session today. It's a very insightful session up until now. And I completely agree with what has been stated up until now, specifically when it comes to being responsible from the player's side. Because one of the points that was mentioned was that there are offshore gambling platforms that are being offered. Well, one of my questions is related to that, but I'll start with the first question first. I have like a couple of two to three questions directed towards the panelists, and I'll be happy whoever takes it. First is regarding the centralization of the regulation, that whether the entire thing can be shifted from states to the center. Coming from a point of view from how each and every state is versatile and different when it comes to the public at large, because say for a state like Odisha, the offering of gambling, game of skill, poker, rummy, whatever you want to term it for the sake of this conversation, is considered as a moral vice. However, for a state like Sikkim, it is completely Sikkim or say for Goa is completely okay to offer an activity which is pure gambling, say casino, with or without license. So is it ideal with the kind of background that India has that step would be practically possible? If not, how do you think that with the advent of Web3 technology and how each state has reacted towards the boom that the industry has seen recently, specifically after COVID, how do you think that whether it should do, not how do you, but do you think that whether we should take a strict step such as blanket ban, or whether it should be regulated or licensed as the likes of state of Meghalaya has done recently? Next is regarding the eSports bit. With the latest virtual online gaming regulation, trying to bring under its ambit the eSports side of things. Do you think that eSport, as it currently is, should be considered a game under the gaming activity and not a sport, as is being considered by other jurisdictions, by other countries worldwide? Because the amount of skill, hard work, and the preparation with vis-a-vis the involvement of coaches and players spending hours in training sessions, etc., and the amount of investment that is there in esports, do you think it's just to bring esports in the category of something which is still an ongoing debate between a game of skill or a game of chance? And finally, regarding the player responsibility, the entire conversation up until 5 minutes ago was that the stakeholder, that is the platform operator, should be more cautious when they are giving out these when they're giving out offering these games. But shouldn't the player himself be more cautious? Because and here I'll bifurcate it into two. First, in game of skill, and second, in offshore gambling activities, as was discussed. Well, when we speak of game of skill, all the necessary precautions are already highlighted on the documents that are there on the website, and that's the best the operator can do with of course, yes, certain videos, and basically whatever is there on the platform in the form of reading or viewing is what an operator can do, because the participation is huge. Even after that, is it just to say that when a player is winning, then they are all happy, but at the moment the player loses is when he is coming back and trying to question the operator? And when it comes to offshore gambling activities, well, offshore gambling here, not emphasis on gambling here, not game of skill. Offshore gambling activities, the likes of Betway and Bet365, well, they are able to offer services in India, which in itself is illegal. And even then, if the player is trying to participate on those websites, how and why should the government or anyone, any regulatory authority, whether voluntary or not, be in support or try to protect a player who is anyway entering into an illegal activity?
Thanks, Rashi. I think there were a lot of questions, and Gowree and Samir, Shivani, all of you, if you could.
I'll take some up and I'll leave the rest for Gowree.
Yeah.
So Rashi, interesting questions, but I'll just tweak your first question a little bit. You asked about how certain states practice certain ideologies and certain other states don't when it comes to certain games. The reality is that if you take Tamil Nadu's example, playing physical rummy is fine, but playing online rummy has become an issue for the last 2-3 weeks. So the ideology here has shifted from it's two-leveled, right? It's one level is what is skill and what is chance, and the other level is something which is fine offline, is a scary concept online, because they all exist as exceptions. So for example, when pay-to-play games are banned, the range is everything from casual gaming to playing Candy Crush with money. I think Ludo also can be played with money, to the range can go up to chess. So here the state ideology really ceases to make a difference, because the only authority that then has the only power that we have constitutionally then goes back to the center when it comes to having a uniform law for scale games, because so far everything was made for gambling and scale games were being put in that category. The second thing about what you said, esports and putting esports in the same category as online virtual sports. So to just take you back to when Mr. Maheshwari was speaking, right now as these gaming companies exist, they're all platforms and intermediaries. So it doesn't matter really that what kind of online game you're offering to a user, because at that time that player is agnostic of the kind of gameplay, but the platform where their data is going away, they're logging in with a certain name, they need protection when it comes to their money coming back. so on and so forth. For offshore, I'm sure Gowree will have a much better answer. But I think Gowree for offshore, there's no requirement for escrow accounts, right? And that's where they beat the concept of not being able to take the money back. How banks have the authority to let a player play betting games, I still haven't been able to figure out.
Gowree, if you would like to chip in here.
Sure. So I think I will, sort of try to, there are 3 questions, so I'll try to figure out one by one. So I think on the central law and, the state-wise thing, I think that is definitely from a challenge perspective will be a challenge at the center to have, all the states agree to one sort of framework. And when I say this for 2-3 reasons. Number one is there are certain states who are totally against, say a particular game format or even games of skill. There are certain states who want a revenue out of the licensing activity, right? There are certain states who are allowing skill and chance both through a licensing activity. So there are different states that have taken a different perspective. But in all this, the players are suffering. It's very clear, right? Because you can't have different states taking different approaches on the one hand, because then you don't have like one law trying to address all the issues. So the way I look at it, it's very simple. And this, I have sort of internalized this, sort of this thought process after a lot of thought, because we may believe that, okay, even if it's a game of skill, it's still, that people are likely to lose money, because obviously when you're staking something, somebody is going to win and somebody is going to lose. But however, once the Indian Constitution and, once the Supreme Court has said that it is a protected activity, right? So we need to move on from that conversation ahead. We can't be, stuck to that conversation still, okay, rummy, should be banned and all that. Let's move on, because ultimately the courts are going to hold against you. So if a skill gaming activity is a valid activity, let's accept that. And then let's decide what else requires to be done, right? And that is where the states need to recognize and realize that they can't be, on this position constantly, because the Supreme Court has said it, right? That, and not only 19(1)(g), the Karnataka High Court is now saying it's a 19(1)(a), right? When they say 19(1)(a), that means, freedom of speech, expression, and all of that also as a part of that. And very, very interestingly, while we are at the constitutional discussion, they have gone and said that in the directive principles of state policy, there is a discussion against, alcohol, cow slaughter, and all of that, but there is no guidance against gambling or gaming or whatever, right? So if that was the long-term, thing, then they would have probably come into at least the directive principle, which is not the case. So therefore, let's move on from that. The second thing is on the on the player protection, and all of that. I'm completely on board to say even the esports time and all of that government and industry can do only so much, right? Whatever Samir explained, okay, maybe something more of awareness and all that. Ultimately, if I want to shop, extensively, nobody can stop me. So similarly, if I want to play extensively, nobody can stop me. It's my right, right? So it is more of creating awareness and making those tools available to me that, hey, your time is so and so, just reminding me. That is all the platform can do. They can make me tools available. That is all they can do. But it is ultimately the parents, ultimately it's the family members, it's a society where we live in, it's the other ecosystem, the schools, all of them have to create an ecosystem where there is a, creating awareness and creating that mindset that this is ultimately an entertainment activity. So let it remain as an entertainment activity. Or for some professionals, of course, it becomes it's a professional activity, then so be it, because then then they know that they can win and they can lose as well, right? So I think that is on point number third question that you asked. The second question that you asked. And on the foreign websites, I think the way I want to address this is whether or not that should be allowed. Not allowed is a decision, and if not allowed, then what is it? That's something the government has to take a decision. I'm not for or against. I'm not getting into that, right? It is a decision that government needs to take. And I agree with you, Rashi, that when you say that ultimately players know that they are putting in money, so what, why should, we talk about it? But ultimately, it's the decision that the government needs to take. Allowed, yes, okay, then these are the, basis on which, the way they have done for the e-commerce, right? They have said that if you're systematically offering your services in the country, then these are your rules for the marketplaces, or inventory based, right? Whatever. So depending upon, or even the data protection law, that is how the thought process is. Depending upon what the government ultimately decides, then obviously they will have to comply. There are some countries which allow remote gaming, some countries which don't allow remote gaming. Today there is no decision that has been taken, because state law don't have extraterritorial application. So a decision has to be taken at the center, whether we like it or not. Let that decision be taken, and let the decision, let it, whatever. Now the current, there is no enforcement, FEMA is not getting enforced, we all know that, right? So I think it's more of taking a decision and taking enforcement action is where we are today, which nobody, is unfortunately deciding one way or the other. And that is what we want clarity on. That is what I just want to leave on that. Esports and all, I think let Samir deal with. I've spoken too much, but happy to take if there is any follow-up question.
Thanks, Gowree. Samir, would you like to come and specifically talk about the player responsibility thing, as well as maybe the esports thing? And then,
I think for me, mostly everything's covered, right? There are two or three things Mr. Maheshwari, of course, said right at the very beginning. One of the key things, and what Gowree said just now, is to figure out which is, the ministry at the center that will be the nodal ministry for this. I think from that, a lot of the other things will automatically emanate. And so, just to be also, I think from an industry perspective, I must say that we finally beginning to see movement, which is really encouraging. In the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of positive movement. I mean, the negative stuff keeps going on, but at least now there's a clear cognizance that there needs to be something done about this. As Mr. Maheshwari said, that at the center, the topmost people are aware of this, cognizant of this, and taking action on it. So I think it's a matter of time now, more than anything else, before something comes out in terms of a regulation. So A, just to park that thought. B, I think for me, this whole discussion around enforceability is huge, because I think that will guide the whole discussion around regulations in a big way. So whilst there might be state subject, central, this, that, concurrent list, all that, and many ways, I think at the end of the day we need to come down to brass tacks and say, have we been able to do anything? And there are multiple examples. For example, Telangana banned in 2017, and we've seen so many cases of rampant fraud happening over there by gaming/gambling companies. So clearly, enforcement, even if you ban, doesn't work is something that is very clear. And we need to take cognizance of this and look at a regulation that proactively addresses the concerns that have been raised.
Here I would like to stop you and just sort of probe you a bit more, that if we look at, since you're talking about a regulatory framework, so is the industry seeking a co-regulatory framework, or is the industry seeking a self-regulatory framework? What is the industry seeking? And if there is a co-regulatory framework requirement, then should there be an oversight board, or should the industry be left to just regulate with the legislation being there, and the legislation and the ministry sort of licensing the SROs to operate, or should there be an oversight board? And if there should be an oversight board, what should be the composition of it, etc., etc.? If you could sort of elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think what I'll broadly say, without getting into too much detailing, frankly, is that I think given that the amount of innovation that happens in this, at today there are close to about 450 startups in this space. Each one of them is trying to do something unique in terms of a game. Oh, here I'm not even talking about whether it's a game of skill or a game of chance. I'm just saying that there is tremendous innovation that's constantly happening. Now, if you look at a government authority trying to actually make sense of this on an ongoing basis, the sort of the sort of staffing that it would require, and the sort of expertise it would require would be. So again, more than right or wrong, I would look at the practicability and the operability of how this could happen. Given this and the fact that if this really gets the sort of support that it needs, we are looking at maybe 8-10,000 companies tomorrow in the country, right? At some point of time, 2 or 3 years down the line. Now, how do you? I mean, it's almost impossible when each one of them might be taking out a new game every month. So you will need a SRO type of structure. You will need industry led. So at a primary level, it will need to be industry. Having said that, there are very, very key elements of player protection that need to be guarded. And so for that, there will need to be some sort of escalation mechanism. So I think the structure that we think would be appropriate is at the first level, it will be the company itself internally having appropriate measures to look at grievance redressal, whatever it might be. If it doesn't get resolved at that, the consumer should have the ability to escalate to the next level, which could be the SRO, or a broader structure which could be defined, a combination of SRO and maybe a committee, etc., which could have ex Supreme Court judge, etc. So there could be a model over there to look at this. And should that also not be able to resolve issues, then the ability to further escalate it to appropriate levels, which could be purely governmental or purely enforcement led. So I think some sort of a 3 or 4 tier structure would be very, very critical. Some parts of these could operate purely on a registration / self-certification perspective. And then in addition, there would need to be on a random sampling basis, maybe audits that happen, etc. So some sort of verification, validation that happens on an ongoing basis to ensure that the requirements that have been set out as part of the requirements to register are being met, and it's not just hearsay, or it's not people are just not declaring something but not doing anything about it. So I think it will be a highly evolved structure. So it won't be a very conventional regulatory sort of structure, because I think given the amount of flexibility this industry has in terms of how it operates and what it does, it would be useful to have that. I don't know if that answers your question, Prince.
I think that broadly answers the question. I do get that there should be a regulatory mechanism and all the stakeholders should be involved. Like that is the baseline. But Gowree, I would like to come to you, and like if at all we are envisioning a central legislation framework or a regulatory framework led by the center, which nodal ministry should guide this? Because we have the consumer protection Department of Consumer Affairs, then we have MeitY, we also have information broadcasting. So these are like as the government itself has set up a 7-member interministerial committee to look into this. So what do you think is the ideal way to go forward in this? And how should the legislation look like? Should it envision a should it like give a broad outline of what needs to be done, or should it specifically look into issues like data privacy, like maybe addiction or things like that, or those things should be left to the SROs and rules, whatever are formed up in under the legislation?
Sure. So you have asked me one of the most difficult questions which nobody has resolved till now. Even the central government is still wondering about which ministry, right? So let me deal with that. I don't think it's a digital space where there are multiple things happening, right? It is the content, it is the consumer protection, plus it is the technology where MeitY comes in, right? So in my view, it has to be maybe one ministry could be given an overall charge, but I feel that it has to be a combination of ministries and not just one ministry. In my view, that is the way I look at it. At a it's a group of ministries that need to look into this. If you ask me a single ministry, then I somehow don't want to answer that question at this stage, because it's a sort of somewhat sensitive subject at this point in time. But coming to the overall, regulation, I think I echo what Samir said. Let's understand that what we have realized over a period of time, there are certain industries or rather new businesses, right, where especially for the digital businesses where things happen at a speed of thought, right? You'll need to have a mechanism where things can be enforced equally at that speed of thought, right? So therefore, or even navigated, even, the regulations have to change at a speed of thought, right? So in that context, I firmly believe that you need a co-regulatory mechanism where the center, probably the law, whichever law, has to set the principles, right? That okay, to say that okay, there is a registration requirement, or these are the code of ethics, the way we have seen for the OTT industry, right? It's a good model where they have given a code of ethics, which is a broad perspective, but the nitty-gritties of that will have to be stated by the industry themselves, because they know their industry better, right? So the detailing of that, you ask me, for example, say responsible gaming, right? What measures are required, industry knows better, and they have more sort of insight as to what other countries are doing, and they're able to do it at a speed of thought, right? So in my view, if you have responsible SROs out there who are independent, right? They are not, I mean, there is always that tension that okay, whether one SRO has stronghold of some operators, that perception is out there sometimes, right? So we need to have SROs who are out of that perception that okay, it truly should represent an independent SRO. And if that is available, in my view, a lot that can be done at an SRO level, because you need that day-to-day guidance. Just to give an example, a particular gaming product comes out, then one cannot say, then the SRO will realize, hey, this product is not kosher. Then they can quickly issue an advisory, we have noticed in the market these type of products are coming out, we sort of don't want these, don't launch these type of products. So that agility is required, which I believe SRO can do a much better job than a bureaucratic system where things are, and I'm not blaming anything, because they do have their own constraints, right? So there will be that push and pull if it is only at the bureaucratic level. It is much better at an SRO level, with the guidance and oversight given through the act, and all the on the consumer grievance redressal. I echo what Samir said, so I'm not going to repeat that.
Okay, thanks, Gowree. I think I'll ask the final question to Shivani. So, like, we can have a law, we can have SROs do self-regulation, etc. But ultimately, it is about player protection, right? So, Shivani, I would like to have your thoughts on the awareness level of players, and how do you think that having a legislation in place or a regulatory framework in place will ensure enforceability of the standards which SROs set, or it will ensure that how these problems which players currently face are addressed with respect to a legislation coming in place.
Thank you, Prince. I mean, that's a very burdensome question again, because see, implementation. See, I'll answer the first question where it comes to awareness. I'll be very honest. The kind of so how we work with players is we give them health and wellness support, adjudication, grievance redressal, and legal support. Whenever there's a question of legal support, these are not players who are losing 10-15 rupees on a platform. These are players who have entered into contracts with gaming companies or have reached a point of no return when it comes to obsessively playing a certain pay-to-play game. So in terms of enforceability, it becomes sort of a joint effort from of course, the civil society, industry, and government. But in terms of implementation, it then goes back to the state, right? That how strongly are you ensuring that there is a uniformity of standards which is being followed by everyone to do a basic level of protection? And that basic level of protection ranges from sexual harassment to data privacy. For example, even your login name can be something which is obscene, and there are platforms that allow players to log in with those names. There is communication happening in these platforms which is allowed because there is no overarching regulatory mechanism over there. if uniformity is followed and then the state tries to implement that and ensure that that uniformity is followed, then the burden comes back to the player of being fully aware and conscious of the fact of what platform are they playing at. Are those platforms regarded as safe platforms or not? And if they aren't, then the battle, then we lose that battle on that aspect entirely. Then that battle goes to either offshore gaming or constant counseling or highlighting, red flagging, high flyers. Everyone is not I mean, again, this is no strong data, but there is enough research that says that every third Indian has at some point of time played an online game. That doesn't make them an addict. The addiction aspect and the control to addiction aspect is then again to like flag high flyers. So yeah, that's my bit on it.
Adding to what you have said, I think there is also a need to have a player survey basically, which basically highlights that what are the challenges players are facing, because a lot of talk is going
Correct.
on, and
Correct.
we do understand the challenges which players face, but there's no hard data or we don't have any evidence of what we are saying. So if we can have sort of data.
And the Prince, there's a reason for that, because not everyone is as invested in those games as they are as users. Not everyone is as invested to participate in this kind of a survey. So this responsibility then has to be a shared responsibility between the industry and a players organization, where there is some kind of a benchmark that will then allow player entry to play, let's say, a pay-to-play game. Right. And not just go up front and think of it as I'm winning I'm spinning the wheel and I'm going to win something, and that also requires skill. That kind of mindset shift will only happen if there is enough participation from both ends.
Yeah.
And here personal data comes into play. So then again, those are other challenges. So yeah.
Thanks, Shivani. I think we have concluded the time. But final thoughts, Sameer, if you could in a minute, and Gowree. Sameer, Gowree, and then Shivani.
No, I just wanted to come in for a moment in terms of what Shivani was saying, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, the fact is that there is no objective data out there. This is just numbers that are being thrown around, and it's largely subjective. We are aware of the fact that as a society, we take very moralistic, paternalistic views on stuff. And these are words that are not mine. They've been recently used by a couple of high courts. So I think there is a need to look at this objectively, definitely. Two, we need to understand that even when we are doing these sort of surveys, it's very easy for a sore loser to say, "Acha, wahan pe bots hai." Right? And the truth of the matter is that, I mean, so my point again with what Shivani said is this needs to be
Sameer, I'm just going to add something. The recent Karnataka High Court judgment quotes and says that there have been millions of deaths because of pay-to-play games. It's a High Court judgment that says that. I mean, where are these millions of people? So yeah, go on.
I mean, so that's what I mean, that, you know, when we do this research, I think it is important for that research also to be extremely objective, because acquisitions karna is one of the easiest things that can happen, and we've seen this. I mean, as a SRO, we receive grievances, and it's usually a sore loser who will say कि अच्छा इनके यहाँ पे ना 50 लोग बैठे रहते हैं जो हमारे साथ खेलते हैं. So you got professional players sitting with play-to-pay and this is classic 1960s Amitabh Bachchan movie gambling den type of scenario, which honestly, you know, we all know tech companies don't operate that way, etc., etc., etc. My thing is, we definitely need this research, because honestly, right now everything is just hearsay. No one has any numbers in hand, and this needs to be done in a way which is, to use that word, idiot proof. And anything that we can do to support it, we'd be very, very happy as an organization to come in and support it, collaborate with, you know, Shivani, Cuts, all of y'all. Very happy to do that.
Thanks, Sameer. Gowree, final thoughts?
No, I completely agree. So I think this has to be a simultaneous process whilst we are, looking at a framework of the law at the center, and that conversations are ongoing, as you are aware. Some of us are in the process of putting in our submissions to the government. In parallel, if this consumer survey is done, as Samir, Shivani, and you mentioned, if that is done, it will give us additional input when we are finalizing the law, right? When we are looking at our recommendation, it will give us additional input. At the same time, it will also probably remove that smoke screen that gets created, that this is, this all that bad is happening, right? So and when you see, even the news reports, they say they were gaming, they lost money. For all you know, they were actually playing on gambling websites and not skill gaming websites. No report says that they were playing on so and so website of so and so, and then they lost money. We don't know. These are all random news reports, right? So if we have that kind of data, right, and the, as Samir said, the industry needs to also collaborate in that process. It will just give us a robust database on the basis of which you can create the law. And when you go to the court also, if it gets challenged or otherwise, that's what courts say, that we want empirical data one way or the other. So that lack of empirical data is where we are today. It will absolutely help us to have that data. Even as a professional, that's what I feel.
Thanks a lot, Gowree. I think we have exceeded the time, and with that, I would just like to conclude the panel discussion and hand it over to my colleague Nilanjana to just give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Prince. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. With this, we aim to close the virtual roundtable discussion. A quick summary of the issues that were discussed were the multi-stakeholder perspective, which is essential for a good industry environment, and also how the industry environment can result in a better output of jobs and growth in the industry. Online gaming cannot be a state prerogative solely, and thus we will need to move forward with a co-regulatory framework in mind. There needs to be an equal responsibility on all stakeholders for effective operation of online games. Also, as at CUTS and other panelists and members of the industry present, we intend to work towards a non-partisan consumer survey coming in the future, and work with the industry, government, and other stakeholders to bring to light the consumers' grievances, issues at hand, and point of view and perception, to take the discussion forward so that the framework of the law at the center can benefit from the same. We extend our sincere gratitude to Nishith Desai Associates for collaborating with us on this virtual roundtable. We also extend our regards to Mr. Rakesh, Maheshwari, Mr. Pradeep S. Mehta for their valuable time. We convey our thanks to panelists Ms. Gowree, Mr. Samir Barde, and Ms. Shivani for a relevant discussion. I thank personally all the participants and discussants on the behalf of CUTS International and Nishith Desai Associates for making this session an interactive one. We will circulate a report of the same soon, and we will continue to work towards empowering consumers through immersive studies, and will keep you updated as we do this. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. With this, I conclude this session.